Good morning. Welcome to the money data panel, which I think is an evolution now that we're, as an industry, going from what is metadata to, okay, it's actually money data. We're gonna jump right in with a pretty casual panel. We all this is the third or fourth day at Music Biz Now? Yes? Third day? All right, cool. So my name is Marcus Cobb. I'm CEO, co-founder of Jamber. I've been coming to Music Biz Now for 3 or 4 years, so I feel like I'm at home. Family. I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll talk a little more about the topic and what we're working on. And I'm going to start off with a music sample that I'm going to play for you guys. It's kind of case in point, one of my favorite small little stories about a song. So we'll start from the far right set. We'll start with Ryan.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Ryan Mall. I work for SOCAN. That's, if you don't know, that's Canada's PRO. I run an organization for SOCAN called SOCAN Labs. And SOCAN Labs is focused on technology innovation opportunities. So working with companies like Jamber, who are creating innovative products that are going to help our songwriters.
Good morning. I'm Rachel Scarpati. I'm the Senior Director of Sales and Business Development at HFA Rumblefish. HFA Rumblefish is part of the multi-rights organization with CSAC, where we represent writers for performance rights, publishers for mechanical rights, and we also provide a back-end suite of services for companies to help them identify, license, and pay rights holders.
Mike Fabio. I'm the VP of Digital Strategy at New West Records. We're a small label based here in Nashville, about 40-ish artists. We've been in business for 20 years, primarily in the Americana, folk, country space, recently in Indian rock and a whole lot of other things. But I head up all things digital, web, social, digital supply chain, advertising. If it lives on the internet, I probably have something to do with it.
Yeah. And Jamber, I'm not spending a lot of time talking about this. Our activation is right next door, so we'd love for you guys to just come check out the apps. It's the best way to understand what we do. But all of us, in some way or the other, are getting artists and creatives paid for what they do. That's what we come down to, from the writing side to in between in digital and even on the label side. We spend a lot of our time and energy on that problem. So why is it so complicated? The whole thesis of this in general is there's this kind of lingering belief that creatives are never, ever, ever going to do what it takes to get paid. How many of you guys are artists in the room, or creatives? Do you agree with that statement, or no? Is that true or false? Yeah. You're all nodding yes. Do we have any producers in the room? How many of you are more behind the scenes about operations, labels, publishers, pub admin? So when Kanye was cutting this song, I think he was in New York, the song was he already knew his songs and tracks he was doing. The label needed that information from him pretty quickly. Kanye and his mom are in Studio A, and then right next door is Patti LaBelle just singing away. They basically drug her, begged her on the spot to perform on the track. And she came in, of course, Patti LaBelle in one take, dropped this amazing ad-lib line. It goes on for about 2 minutes. It's a gorgeous song. No one had any idea that, of course, Patti LaBelle was on that track, and the credits were already submitted for the album. So there's an entire generation of new listeners who love that song, love Kanye, love her voice, and have no idea it's her. This is one of the reasons that, and we could have opened up possibly a whole new revenue stream for her in that way. This is one of the reasons that metadata is so important. Music, by design, is chaotic. We can all agree with that. It's going to come from anywhere. It's very serendipitous. We bump off each other. We create music. So we're going to talk about ways that, first of all, we're going to talk about the kind of current state from our perspectives, and then we're going to talk about ways that you can make it easier, really small things to do to work with creatives to get the metadata you need, to get them paid, to get them credited. Cool? So I'll start with this way, kind of current state. Where do you think metadata is as far as where it's been historically? The metadata that you're seeing come across your desk, so to speak, and your businesses is better, worse, or about the same than it's been in the last, let's say, 5 years?
Well, I'll start, I guess. I don't know that it's better or worse. I think that we have to take into consideration the volumes of data and the sources of the data. So if you think about decades ago, you had record labels who had central sources of data. They had research teams. They had copyright teams. and they had a volume of releases that were probably manageable by those teams. And today you have, if you want to launch a new streaming service, you have tens of millions of tracks that need to be licensed and accounted for. So the sources of that data, where you have direct distribution channels to those services, whether that's a streaming service, a download service, a mobile app. You also have more fragmentation in the marketplace. So I think the biggest key right now is that there's more discussions about data, as this panel also exemplifies. So you have more conversations about data, how to register data, how to manage that data, and how to connect all of the pieces to ultimately enable payment.
So I think you touched on two things there that have changed almost at the same time, but unrelated. One, streaming brought a tidal wave of data, and we'll talk more about what that data looks like. But two, the labels largely did this in a black box before, not a black box, but they have proprietary systems to manage this. So the labels were doing with less data with very advanced systems, and now everyone has to kind of tackle it in different ways. They don't have those same teams. So Mike, will you kind of speak to that for a little bit? Because you guys are an indie label, obviously.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I will say for us, our metadata situation has gotten significantly better, at least over the last couple of years, primarily because now we are paying far more attention to it. We have to make sure that the data is right. If we don't get paid, the artists don't get paid, writers don't get paid, et cetera, et cetera. And even beyond just getting paid, making sure that our metadata is right also helps us in our marketing, helps us in all the other aspects of our business that we wouldn't be able to take advantage of if we didn't have the data right. To your point, Marcus, I think that the technology is also getting better. Yes, for the last 20 years probably, we've been doing things with Google Docs and lots of really awful,
Excel.
Yeah, I mean, systems that are, well, we're still using Excel for some things, not because we want to, but because we're in some cases forced to. But I think that while our data is getting better, the data that we send out into the world is not always received in exactly the same ways by everybody else.
Yeah.
And that introduces all kinds of other issues into the workflow. And again, it's sort of, as the technology becomes more and more ubiquitous, but also more fragmented at the same time, we start running into all kinds of issues that we didn't know we were going to have.
Yeah, before we get to Ryan, I want to paint just a little bit of context because we kind of live and breathe metadata every day, so we're super close to it. But how many of you know what we mean when we say metadata, what that means? I think you've been coming to music biz for a while.
Wait, how many people don't know what metadata?
Who doesn't know what metadata means? Are you really brave? You don't? Thanks. Yeah, that takes courage, man. And you're wearing pink. That's like double manhood right there. That's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. What'd you say? Yeah, salmon. So something as simple as your name, your legal, the name your mama gave you, as we say, something as simple as having that wrong can affect how you get paid. I've told the story a million times. Here in Nashville, I was working with the label and we were kind of researching the industry, and there were all these payroll checks that they had in filing cabinets and on conference tables that were returned to sender. This means that they were paying musicians and paying engineers and producers, but they couldn't cash a check for whatever reason because they either moved or their name was their nickname, like Bubba Blue instead of John Smith, or whatever it was. And the reason why they couldn't get it back is we're all so disconnected. The label's here, the producer's here, the payroll company's here. So that data is really tight. So what's changing now, though, is those walled gardens are kind of falling down a little bit. And Ryan, you guys at SOCAN are trying to open that up with Cool Tech. You want to speak to that as well and why that's important?
Yeah. One of the issues that Marcus is bringing up is that in order to get people paid, we need to know all the players that are involved with the different compositions that are created. So SOCAN, as a PRO, we represent the songwriters and the composers. And sometimes there's one person, sometimes there's 20 people that are involved. And maybe they don't even have equal splits on all of that information. So it's a lot of information that's required in order for us to do our job effectively. So one of our strategies is to work with the different platforms that are being created out there that are creating technological solutions to make this easier for everybody. So somebody like Marcus and Jamber, they're creating some really great pieces of software, plug, that can help you settle some of these kind of sensitive discussions that come around, especially when you're talking about splits and ownership of a composition. They're creating tools that you can settle those kind of dispute resolutions immediately on the spot when you're creating it. And that makes things a lot easier. And if we can find a way to work with platforms like Marcus's or other platforms that are out there that enable you to inform us of the different data points at the point of creation, it makes paying you a lot easier.
So I'm going to play you guys another song, and from a really obscure artist. I want you to raise your hand the moment you know which artist this is, okay? Come on, fellas. Who is it? You heard like one note. You're like, it's Beyonce. So this is Beyonce, obviously from the Lemonade album. Huge album, very transparent album. And if you look at the writers' credits that are out there, there were 77 writers credited for this one album. 77 writers for the album. We're seeing this new trend. I've heard it called Frankenwriting, right? Where you send out a song and people add a line here or people add a phrase here, just shift things around. And the average number of writers per song I heard is about 7 people per song. Is that what you guys are seeing, Rachel?
Yeah, in certain genres, definitely. Country have fewer writers often, but when you get into genres like a hip hop genre, you're going to see a lot more writers on that track. And then also having to break that down to from a writer, then you might have a publisher on top of that, and identifying who owns which part because it's fragmented. So, if Ryan and I wrote a song together, maybe he owns 75%, I own 25%, whatever we negotiate. Where do you register that data? How do you make sure that data is in a database? And then how do you make sure that composition can be identified in a sound recording, right? Because you have 2 different assets there. Sound recording is that audio, composition is that underlying musical work. So going from the audio file to get to that composition to enable payment to Ryan and I for our respective shares is a big challenge.
So we're all hearing the same story over and over again. We know you've got to register your splits with Jammer. You have to capture everybody's credits with Jammer. Matter of fact, we're all going out through these doors into the activation. It's the only exit available when we're done. But it's still super hard to do. And I, on one hand, just from a general aspect of the music industry, I don't care what tools you use. Like, let's just all get artists paid. And we've all been on panels and all over the world. And there's a general sentiment that our goal as an industry is to get owners, rights owners, and artists paid, period. So how do we do that with the tools we already have in play? First of all, I want to dispel the lie that creatives won't do it. I think that's way overstated, and let's be careful what we believe. There are small things we can do to just get enough. We don't need everything, right? We don't need you to sit in the studio and write down their mom's name, their dog's name. We'll start with email addresses, just so we can find out to them, right? So have you guys seen or yourselves done anything, small interesting ways you've tried to meet creatives where they're at to make that metadata delivery, and you don't have to say Jammer, but to make it more easy for them? What are some examples of what you've seen so far done?
Well, at HFA Rumblefish, we've been aggregating composition metadata for over 90 years. And so, of course, we've seen a lot of change in the industry and the platforms that enable that aggregation to happen. Similar to what Ryan and his team are doing, we're also working with companies that are aggregating that as well. So we have direct feeds from publishers, but we also work with companies who are aggregating songwriters in the market so that we're continually working with businesses to businesses to receive normalized data and get that into the system quicker to enable the payout from the services that are relying on Rumblefish to do their back-end administration. So if you as a songwriter and an artist want to be paid from services like Spotify and YouTube and others, then those compositions need to be registered in our database because those services and many others have engaged us for those services. And if we don't know who you are and we don't know how to pay you, we don't have your tax form, we don't have your email address.
So in a nutshell, services like Spotify, et cetera, rather than going to every writer and publisher out there, they go to entities like you, Rumblefish, and then you guys are helping Spotify pay the rights holders. Is that accurate?
Yes.
But you can only pay them if you know who
If
they
we
are.
know them.
So the songs need to be registered with you.
Correct.
How many of you have any music at all, publishers, labels that's streaming out there? Really? Wow. How many of you knew that you had to register with entities like Rumblefish to get paid on streaming? I would say that's about pretty representative. 20 to 30% of people know that.
Yep.
A lot of people that we deal with have no idea that it's even necessary. They just think that once they register with their PRO, it's done.
I think that's a really important point because, as you said, you don't believe that artists are unwilling or unable to do this. The issue might just be an educational one. It might be that so many artists simply don't know the process, don't know who to register things with. Even from the label side, I can tell you that we work with a number of artists who don't know that they need to tell us that they've written or recorded a song. In many cases, they just put it out without us. It doesn't happen that often.
Do you have any stories you want to share around that? I'm just joking.
But I do think that that's an educational issue more often than it is a technological issue or even a sort of procedural issue.
Yeah. Now, I know, and this isn't a pitch, so one of the things we're trying to do is automate registration. Jamber is just one of the companies. Tune Registry's been doing it for a long time. There are other companies out there already doing it. But it's really hard to automate registration because the systems are kind of old. I had one company ask me to fax them registrations. I'm like, okay, we can do that, but I had to go find a fax machine first.
That wasn't us.
But there are companies, we're seeing more and more APIs open up, and that's one of the reasons we started working with SOCAN early on, right, with the registration. Is it along the same thing, just kind of bringing down the wall so that you can get registrations and set lists in more easily, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, no, that's a big part of the strategy. We saw that there were a lot of companies that were trying to get these data feeds, a lot of companies that were working with these data sets as well. But the ease of use of bringing that data in is not as simple sometimes. Sometimes it's like you said, like flat files or like FTP server drops and things
Carbon
like
copy
that.
paper.
Yeah. So we created a whole API platform to bring on registrations to SOCAN, works registrations to SOCAN, notification of live performances. That's when you play in a concert, you have to let us know what you played. All these different things, but these APIs are also enable like a two-way communication. So let's say you needed to update your splits. You could do that through the API. And through some of the more traditional methods of aggregating this data, that's not really possible. So we're really trying to figure out ways to, like you said, lower those barriers, create like a frictionless environment to get the data as seamlessly and easily as we can.
Well, I think that's a really important point too, is that data is dynamic.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're selling your shares or there's catalogs of compositions that are being changed hands over the course of time, so great, you register your composition today, but what happens a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, and that data might change, keeping these systems up to date so that as those things change, the systems know about those changes in a streamlined, efficient manner so that it can now pay the correct shares to the correct owners over time.
Impact downstream. So the story, as I've heard it multiple times, is that Justin Bieber was at a club in Brazil, heard this track come on, and the club went crazy. And immediately called his team, called Pooh Bear, called Scooter, like, we have to cut this song. They added a verse, Justin Bieber and Pooh Bear, so it went from 2 or 3 original writers to now 5 writers on the remix. And then, of course, that song went over, I think, like 1.2 billion streams pretty quickly. I'm sure the DSPs know it even bigger. It was one of the biggest summer tracks of the year, if not just big years, track period. But the registrations are a mess across the board. And the reason for that is the systems don't handle that back and forth communication very, very well. And I think there was an article on Billboard about this, or there was something like that. What, as an industry, can we do to facilitate that change, right? These conversations are great on their side, but as an industry, do you see anything happening at a macro level that's going to improve that in the near future?
Do you want to take it?
Sure, I'll take it. I think that there's a lot of conversations. You know, you've got entities that are working together across industry, across different facets in the industry. You have movements and organizations like DDEX that are talking about data standardizations. How do we communicate with our systems, one another, both on the sound recording release side as well as the composition side, to make sure that all of the data assets are enabling payment in the fastest way possible. That's across masters, that's across performance rights, it's across mechanical reproduction rights, and then it's also across, the added layer that we haven't really talked about is territory. So there's definitely a lot of movement in getting the data in the right databases to be not just there and known, but also transactable. And that's something that we really work at HFA Rumblefish to do, is make sure that we have the updated information, we have the most robust data available, but then we also work to facilitate clearances for just different distributed uses like lyrics, tablature, background music service, audio-visual uses, audio-only streaming uses, by having those relationships with publishers, facilitating direct agreements and opt-ins with those publishers, and then downstream with the payments. So having all of these teams work together across the industry to talk about the data feeds and APIs or automation and closing some of those gaps that, again, ultimately result in payments.
Cool. So we've kind of touched very, very lightly on a massive, very fluid challenge. I also know CISAC, which is kind of over a lot of the societies. They're working on, I think they're trying to speed up the ISWC system over the next couple of years so that your songs get identifiers faster. 8 years ago, we were doing about 73,000 album releases a year. Now we're closer to 400,000, 500,000 songs every week. They're just being uploaded to the ecosystem. And pretty soon, that's going to be millions. So this isn't going to slow down. Like, this problem is going to keep coming out. So how do we get people engaged? Do you guys, anybody use Google Suite or Word docs, things like that, to write your music, or calendar invites to schedule your sessions, especially creatives? Raise your hands high if you do. Yeah? Have you ever had a story where a hit song was coming out and you had no idea who the payees were, like who to pay? Or a hit song was making money, you had no idea who to pay?
We put out records on the regular where we still don't know who wrote a given song.
So people ask all the time, like, well, how can you do that? Why don't you just wait until you figure it out? Like, why are you guys doing that? I'm joking, though, Mike.
There's a big challenge with street date for releases. So you've got street date, you've got the releases coming out, but the writers or their publishers are still negotiating what the shares are. So until that's settled, that song's not going to be registered in any database. And so when that new release comes out on a service and then they try to license that, that becomes a challenge. So the timing of new releases and compositions being negotiated and registered, there's a big challenge there. So what happens is that you have data that's continually reprocessed, so that if a composition is not registered today on street date release, maybe it's registered tomorrow or in a week from now or a quarter from now, to be able to make that link between that audio asset and the composition that then enables the payment. But unfortunately, the timing of street date release for when the master's ready to go versus when the publishing's been settled doesn't always align.
And I think that is the most common scenario right there. When there is an issue, it has to do with the writers either not agreeing about something or still negotiating something or whatever it might be, where something simply can't get registered in time.
So let's talk about metadata on the other side of it. We've all heard about on the payment side. Let's talk about on the discovery side and actually growing the pie. Like, an example I give all the time, I grew up on 90s R&B, and during that time, there's this duo called Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. They did everything from New Edition, Boyz II Men, Janet Jackson. I think they had 21 number ones during that time, and many more hits. However, it is impossible for me to say, hey Alexa, play me all the songs by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Hey Alexa, play me everything that touches Peter Frampton. That type of metadata doesn't exist, so we're not able to grow the pie. People listen to about, I think it's 2.5 hours of music a day now and kind of growing. But when they are introduced to new music on the kind of perimeter of their comfort zone, we talk about all the time for old school people, Tower Records. If you've ever been to a Tower Records, and so I'm not alone. You go to Tower Records, you buy an album or a Laserdisc or a CD, and you read on the back of it, and okay, this was produced by Babyface. What else did Babyface produce? And that's how I discovered some other artists. It's hard to do that today. So when we talk about metadata, first and foremost is who you are. But second, who else was there with you in the room? And especially on the label side, right?
For sure, and especially for things that were recorded or made far before digital services existed, before we needed to capture this metadata. I was listening to one of our albums in our catalog that we had purchased a catalog about 10 years ago from a defunct label called Texas Music Group. It's a bunch of blues recordings. I'm listening to this record by Barbara Lynn. It gets to the last track, and all of a sudden there's a rapper on this track. Completely unexpected, and he sounds exactly like Tupac, like
Wow.
Tutti. And I look on the title, I'm looking in the metadata we have, there's no mention of this guy anywhere.
Wow. Was it
And-
Tupac?
It's not Tupac.
Oh.
Spoiler alert.
All right, next question. So we're gonna,
No, but this is where it gets really crazy, is that we don't have any of this information in our metadata.
Yeah.
Because we purchased this catalog, it was all, basically all this stuff was digitized off of old CDs. And in fact, we didn't even have the CD in our collection to look at the liner notes. We had to buy a used CD on Discogs to actually figure out who this guy was.
wow. Wow.
And so there's all these issues of metadata that surround recordings and compositions, for that matter, made before the advent of digital services.
See, this is why I say, and I'm going to be very succinct here, but this is really important to me because this is my area of study. Why is it hard for creatives to do the admin task, we'll call them the left brain tasks, to get paid? It actually does feel physically harder. And I'm going to explain it as high level as I can just from the bits of information I've picked up over time. When you look at how your brain works, there's two kind of different things it does really well. One is working memory. Artists have really high working memory, especially musicians. That means that you can hear a song, you can keep that song from beginning to end in your mind, and just continue to work with it right there. But what you lose is what's called context switching. And context switching is like, okay, I really just want to go from A to Z. I want to schedule an appointment, but first I've got to look up your phone number, and then I've got to find the date, and I've got to see if that venue is available. Your brain is a muscle like anything else in your body. It's an organ. And everything it does, it's burning resources. So when you're really high working memory, it likes to kind of favor that. So anything that context switching is very expensive for it. You're either a high context switcher or you have high working memory. And so when you look at it as a part of anatomy and physiology, it's not that complicated. So we just have to kind of simplify it. Does that make sense? There's a couple of cool things you guys can do that are just super easy. One, you can trick your brain at creatives into not hating that task. An easy way to do that is say, this is only going to take me 2 minutes. When you tell your brain this is only going to take me 2 minutes to do, and it will usually take you less, it will allow you to do that. It will give you the resources because its fear is that you're going to burn out. Your brain is just trying to keep you efficient all day long so that you can have a productive day, right? So if you sit down and do a task, you're like, I got to capture everyone's names and their email addresses, that sounds burdensome. But if you say, I'm just going to take literally 60 seconds here, just you guys write your stuff here and we'll go. That feels a lot different. Make sense? So there is a psychological aspect to it as one of those things that we can do. We can talk more about that as a passionate topic. But I think it's also, once you have that, what do you do with it? So what are some of the places they have to register their songs? We talked about HFA, where else? Now that I'm doing it myself, as a publisher, I know publishers who don't know where to register their music at as well, or a label, once I go global distribution, where do I need to make sure my songs are registered to get the biggest bang for my buck globally, right? These are global supply chains today. I upload a song here, it goes into 26 territories, 120 territories. So how do I make sure I get paid?
Well, there's also, you definitely need it at HFA. You need to have your compositions registered at your performance rights organization or PRO. So that could be ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, GMR, SOCAN, of course. Don't worry, I got you. And so there's also what's called a reciprocal agreement. So there are societies around the world that take registrations in their territories, and then they build relationships cross territories. So we at HFA have reciprocal arrangements with many territories so that we've built those bridges from a data and royalty perspective. And then there's other services like Mint Digital and some other folks who are working internationally to license online digital services to collect royalties and enable distribution of those compositions as well. So it's kind of a one-to-many relationship. While there's multiple places to register those compositions, you're also getting kind of your bang for your buck because there are one-to-many relationships that are already in place.
Mike, how about for a label? Like when you guys are doing release, who do you tell?
Well, as far as the recording goes, we don't actually have to tell anyone. I mean, that's the weird thing about it, I guess. But certainly if you have, when we're putting something out, we need to work with the artists to get any and all information that was created during the recording process, whether that's, who was playing on the recording, who wrote the songs, whatever it might be, where it was recorded.
And that's the contrast, right? Because what we're really saying is on the artist side, as the performer side, there's less work to do as far as where you register the work. But on the composition side, it's pretty heavy-handed. Is that what we're saying as a general theme, or is that not accurate?
I mean, pretty much, if you're signed to a recording deal, then the only person you need to tell about your recording is your label. And so I would say, obviously, keep your label in the loop, please.
Well, and then on the composition side, what has been an emergent trend is collection of recording information with that composition registration. So when you're registering your song, also including any ISRCs from the recording, because what will happen downstream from the label's going to send, again, that metadata to the streaming services and other partners. That's going to send that data, and there needs to be a match component that happens between the sound recording asset and the composition asset. And if you have the recording information already built into that composition registration, that's going to make that match happen really, really quickly and enable that payment faster than if you're relying on fuzzy logic matching or other matching algorithms or different methodologies. So when you're registering compositions, if you have ISRCs to register with them, that also can be a really key component to enabling that payment.
So let's real quick spin this conversation around to negotiation of splits and kind of talk about that. I've been in business for a long time. Like I said, mostly as an amateur. I recently worked on a song with a producer friend of mine, and we're vibing in the studio. Things feel great. Candles are burning. We're drinking vodka. He's smoking weed, and I'm not condoning that. If your state says it's illegal, it's illegal. But we were vibing out, and because I'm working on the apps, I'm testing it a little bit. I'm like, hey, so before we get to this, let's talk about splits. She's like, oh yeah, man, that's professional of you. Let's do that. So what do you think? I'm thinking 50-50, man. Because in Nashville, the general rule is we split it equally, right? Nashville's very proud of the fact that we don't negotiate over that. We split it equally. If you're in the room, you get a cut. If we don't like you, we just never write with you again. It's simple. So we're like, agree, yeah, 50-50. And then the song got kind of hot. And he's like, well, actually, since I did the beat, I'm thinking 75-25. Right there in the room, it changed that much. Do those percentage points really make a difference downstream? Or is it important? Should I fight over a point? Is there a rule set? How do I even know? What's your opinion when it comes to negotiating? On record.
It's something, honestly, we're not in the middle of, so I
No opinion?
defer
Mike?
to these guys.
We're typically only involved in that on the recording side. On the writing side, let me put it this way. I think the most important thing is that you do exactly what you just did and do it up front as early as possible. I think that, and get it in writing, whether that's on your phone or on a piece of paper, whatever it is, just
Or the Jammer split tap?
I don't, or Jammer, whatever. whatever it is,
Last one, I promise.
record it. Like put it in stone. This it's 50-50. It's 33, whatever you want to do. Just like make sure that you have some record of that from day one. I think that's really one of the most important things you can do.
All right, so let's take some questions from the crowd. But before we do that, I'm just going to ask Ryan, you work with tech companies across the board. You're kind of scouring the earth for cool new things. What else are you seeing around solving this problem? Just give me a couple bullet points.
There's a lot of different platforms that are out there that touch on different aspects of the business, be it music creation, rights management online, like a tune registry, from other companies that help you monetize your music either through distribution channels or through sync opportunities. All of these different platforms give you abilities to register your works and register your songs with these different organizations if they're worth their salt. So we're just trying to make sure that every single platform that's out there that you could actually touch on something that can make you money, that SOCAN's integrated into that. So that's kind of our thing.
Cool.
Touching back on like something we were saying earlier about like how sometimes things can get out ahead of registrations, ahead of negotiating those splits. It's incredibly important to do that as soon as you can, right at the beginning of the process, because it's incredibly hard to track that down afterwards. We at SOCAN, we actually have a call center that goes and tries to find people that we have money for. And it's incredibly difficult to do that. And people are really almost conditioned at this point when somebody calls you and says I have an interesting offer for you. It's kind of hard to believe, right?
Yeah.
But by using these different pieces of software that are out there and these different tools that are becoming available, it decreases, like I said, that friction to making it something that you just like do in your normal workflow. And that's, I think, is kind of the future of what everybody needs to be doing.
That's a huge point because I don't know a single society or PRO of any size who does not have a call center with outbound calls to say, hey, so I have some of your money here. Just come down to the office. And more often than not, the artist won't reply because it sounds like a scam. I have a new friend, Nita, who was at Sound Exchange for a long time. And they would literally just go to door and be like, look, this is your check. It's okay. There's no consequence. Like, just sign here. It's yours in general. I would say as an industry, we probably spend, I'm going to say 30% of our resources just trying to find who we need to pay.
Yeah.
At least, in general. All right, so we're going to open up for a few questions. I saw your hand go up already. Tell us your name. Livy, Austin, Texas? Love Austin. What's your question?
Cool. I've noticed there are multiple ISRCs and multiple ISWCs per composition. I'm wondering who assigns those, why are there so many per comp, and also why are there multiple artist IPIs per artist, and why aren't they the same across all PROs?
Next question. So it's, yes.
I'm very caffeinated.
So first of all, that's absolutely true, but the reason why is a lot simpler than it sounds, right? Those identifiers come from standards bodies and organizations, and they supply them. But people are using them in different ways. And people are experimenting with different ways, and different companies in different ways. And because the industry is so fluid, it's not a straight line. So the composition, like we said, is here, but it might get registered way later. And then the song comes out here, and then different platforms that the music goes through are also different. This platform requires ISRCs, ISWCs. This one does not. And so you'll see, or this one assigns different ISRCs per territory, which I know Paul, if he's in a room, or Mark, that feel like that should not happen. So across the board, IPIs, but that's the high level. I'll let them speak from an expert level on where some of those things come from specifically.
So ISRCs are created either by the label or by whoever distributes that music, but typically it's by the label. And the reason that there are multiple ISRCs on any given composition is because a recording is by definition a derivative work, and so therefore you can have a single composition that's been recorded hundreds or thousands of times, and so each of those recordings has its own ISRC, even though they should all technically be tied to the same ISWC. That is not always the case, but that in an ideal world, that would be how that would
Which
work.
is something that we've done at HFA Rumblefish. So we take in composition information and link that to the sound recording. So we do have a relationship database that takes those multiple ISRCs and ties them down to a unique composition. We assign it a unique proprietary code called an HFA song code. So we're keeping track of the ISWCs where they've been assigned on those compositions, the ISRCs where they exist, again, on a one-to-many basis, where you have multiple recordings tied out to that individual composition asset.
There's a lot of investment across the entire industry on exactly that problem.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, two in the aisle.
My name is Christian Larson, and I have a question regarding payout of royalties. You guys mentioned that the PROs sometimes have call centers, or they go door to door to try to figure out who to pay and get that money to them. What happens if you guys don't know who to pay and you can't figure that out? What happens to the money?
We hold it and wait until we can find that person, or wait until the time is right to find the right information, maybe from another source, maybe through some of that matching algorithms that we have in place. But
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and we, definition of we, it's sometimes the services are holding the money. So it's not necessarily that the entity who's doing, like Rumblefish doesn't collect the money until we can pay it out to you. So any of our clients who might be holding royalties that need to be paid out because we haven't been able to identify the owner because it hasn't been registered in the database, the companies are aware, we're aware that that money is due, but until that composition is registered, we can't collect that money from the service or the licensee to then enable that distribution. So I think it depends on what right you're talking about. You're talking about performance rights, you're talking about mechanical rights, and how those frameworks of licensing works as to where that money's sitting. But once that's been registered, it can then be distributed out to the rights holders.
And also what territory,
And what
right?
territory,
What
yeah.
territory,
So it works
neighboring
differently.
rights. There are instances where if you don't collect your money for a time span, 2 years, 7 years, it goes into a black box. It might be distributed by market share for the publishers. So there's so many, I mean, even in the States alone, I think we have 37 licensing entities or royalty entities before we even get into licensing types, right? So it's super complicated, but generally most of them hold the money until they find you.
But that's why it's so imperative too to register, and having in writing who owns what percentage and getting that into the databases as soon as possible, so that when the first usage is happening on that composition, that payment's going out the door, and you don't have to worry about what territory and what are the rules in those territories and those rights types.
And the same goes on the recording royalty side too. Like, one of the most important things you can do is make sure that all the people who are supposed to pay you know where to send the check. Like just having addresses
Addresses,
is one of
big deal.
the biggest problems we have.
And it will be a check in most cases these days still. Next question.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Chris. You mentioned the DDAX earlier, the
Yes.
data standardization.
Yeah.
So my background's mostly in software engineering, and I wanted to know if the DDAX is like the main authority on data standardization, or is this like Game of Thrones where there's like a shitload of people all deciding who's the authority? Is there a single source of truth for who's enforcing the standards?
The answer
Well, when
is
you
both.
said Game of Thrones, Mark, who's over there from DDEX, started laughing. So that's probably a good sign that it's more Game of Thrones-ish. No, I don't want to speak for him. You can actually talk to him afterwards. But in general, for those of us who participate in DDEX, it's very much a community of collaborators, right? So we all have separate agendas and different needs that we need, but it's finding that low-hanging fruit and common ground where this is the compromise, like any standards body. And generally, that's it. Matter of fact, the next plenary for DDEX meeting is here in Nashville in 2 weeks. So I've only been to 3 or 4 plenaries now, but they're all very cordial. We'll fight over stupid things like, is it called an album or is it called a package or a bundle? Nuances like that, but the broader mission moves forward.
JSON.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, they reference old standards bodies quite a bit. So they'll look at things as old as like SGL and HTML and kind of learn from those lessons. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Isabel. I'm from the University of Memphis. I was wondering for like getting live performance royalties, when you register with your PRO and the venue like isn't recognized and you have to add a new venue, like if you can't get the money from the venue for some reason, like would the artist or the writer like still ever get their money? Like how would that work?
So yeah, we do. We always ensure that you're getting paid as long as the performance is being reported correctly. And so that comes down to like we need to know what was played as well. So we need the entire set list. So that's a whole other ball of wax that we haven't really gotten into, live performances. But yeah, we always try and make sure that we pay somebody if they've reported to us, because we have general licensing across a number of venues. And like we said, like we don't always know what was played. So sometimes we collect the money and it's kind of just sitting in a general licensing account. So it's not the most ideal situation, but the people that do report to us, we pay them.
Okay, thank you.
But it's a good point, though. You can't get paid twice as a performing artist. And I think just knowing that and researching what he was saying is cool. You get paid for your performance, and then you get paid on royalties because that venue should be paying licensing fees to your society or PRO. But you have to register those songs, otherwise they have no idea what's been played.
If anybody has other questions about live performance, you can talk to me afterwards.
So you had, go ahead. Led Zeppelin, T-shirt, go ahead.
Do you have any idea how much Black Box money distributes every year to publishers and also to the record labels based on market share?
Do we have any idea how much black box money is distributed by companies?
It's paid out to the publishers and the record labels. This is money that was not paid to the artists or the writers.
I think by definition it's called black box.
Yeah, Black Box.
I don't think anybody really knows. I will say this, though. There are fewer black boxes than white boxes out there. So let me say that first, right? If you look at the global territory, this whole conversation is about finding the people to pay because it's a white box. Make sense? So we register your works, we can get that money paid out. A lot of societies are overseen by their government, especially in European territories. But there are still black boxes out there and different types of things. So for me personally, I don't know the actual number. But I would imagine it's in the billions. What's a white box? A white box is a term I just made up right now from the podium. But to me, essentially a white box is, look, your money's there. So black boxes have a negative connotation that if you don't claim your money fast enough, it's going to go to other people, right? And that means that those people are kind of incentivized not to pay you, not to find you. Those are few and far between. I think we're going to see even some more transparency brought to the U.S. with MMA. We'll see how that plays out, but there's some positive signs there overall. A white box is a term I just made up. You guys can cycle that throughout all of music biz. Is the money's there. It's not going anywhere. All you have to do is register and get paid.
Well, also from a mechanical perspective through HFA Rumblefish, we provide full transparency on those payouts. So you get line-by-line reporting across all the services we're administering so that you know exactly where your royalties are coming from, what the usage is tied to on a track-by-track composition and publisher ownership share basis. That's true on both the service side. We give those reports to our clients. We also give those reports to the publishers in those royalties. So full transparency is really, really key, and that's already happening in the industry, at least from a mechanical perspective.
Full round of applause for the panelists,
Great.
please. Thank you, guys. And now a round of applause for me, please.